The smell of my daughter's clothes that burned still clung to my judicial robes when Cordelia Whitmore walked into my courtroom like she owned it. That same psychotic smile, the one she'd worn while poisoning my landscaping for violation evidence. The one she'd flashed while embezzling from our community fund. The one she'd probably had watching my house burn with my 16-year-old daughter's childhood memories inside. But this HOA terrorist made one fatal miscalculation. She never bothered learning who she was destroying. I'm not just some divorced contractor she could intimidate into fleeing. I'm Municipal Judge Maxwell Sterling, and she just committed attempted murder against the one man in this district with the legal power to annihilate her existence. 18 months of systematic harassment. One night of arson. One moment of beautiful reckoning. She thought burning my house would silence me. Instead, she just handed me the gavel to torch her entire criminal empire. Stick around, this story gets absolutely insane. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. My name is Maxwell Sterling, but my new neighbors knew me as Mac the contractor. What they didn't know was that I'd spent 15 years as municipal judge, sending actual criminals to prison. After presiding over a particularly vicious gang murder trial where I'd received death threats for 6 months, and surviving a divorce that cost me half my assets, I desperately needed anonymity. So when I bought this fixer-upper on Maple Circle with my settlement money, I became Mac the Handyman. It wasn't a lie. I genuinely loved carpentry, and after years of other people's chaos, there was something healing about replacing rotten deck boards with my own hands. My 16-year-old daughter, Sage, found the whole thing hilarious. "Dad, you're basically going undercover in suburbia," she laughed while we unloaded boxes that muggy Saturday morning. The smell of fresh mulch mixed with automatic sprinkler mist, creating that distinctly suburban perfume of manufactured perfection. I'd specifically chosen Willowbrook Estates because it screamed boring. Cookie-cutter colonials, matching mailboxes, signs everywhere proclaiming maintained by Willowbrook community standards. After dealing with gang members and violent felons, I figured my biggest drama would be debates about fence colors. Then I met Cordelia Whitmore and realized some tyrants don't need badges or guns. She appeared while our moving truck blocked the street, a perfectly manicured woman in designer sunglasses, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. Her white Lexus sat parked diagonally across 2 spaces, but somehow our truck was the neighborhood crisis. What really unnerved me was her smile, the same cold satisfaction I'd seen on sociopaths in my courtroom. "I certainly hope you understand we maintain standards here," she announced, her voice carrying the entitled authority of someone who'd never been challenged. Her perfume hit me like a department store ambush, expensive, overwhelming, and designed to announce dominance. The judge in me immediately cataloged the violations: selective enforcement, intimidation tactics, probable civil rights issues. But Mac the contractor just smiled. "Sorry for the inconvenience. 20 more minutes tops." "This isn't about inconvenience," she scribbled furiously. "Unauthorized vehicle placement violates Section 4.2 of our community covenants. That's a $150 fine, and I'll need it paid within 10 days or we'll place a lien on your property." Here's something most people don't know. HOA liens can actually force property sales if unpaid, giving boards tremendous power over homeowners. The takeaway? Always research an HOA's enforcement history before buying. Sage's jaw dropped. I caught her eye and gave the subtle head shake that meant let her hang herself. That evening, my neighbor Dolores Vega filled me in over our fence line. 73, retired teacher, and clearly the neighborhood's resistance intelligence officer. "She's destroyed 3 families in 18 months, Dolores whispered, glancing around like we were planning a prison break. "Same playbook every time. Violations, escalating fines, property liens, forced sales. She keeps photos of the problem families leaving, like trophies. What kind of families? Though I already knew. Interracial couple, single mother, immigrants. Funny how she never violations the Pemberton's medical practice parties or the country club wine nights that go until 2 a.m. The next morning brought a certified letter on expensive letterhead, reeking of laser toner and legal intimidation. Notice of violation, establishing pattern of non-compliance. Apparently 37 minutes of truck presence constituted a pattern. "Dad," Sage said, reading over my shoulder, "just tell her you're a judge. This is crazy." I folded the letter carefully. Here's what she didn't understand. In my courtroom, I'd seen hundreds of bullies. The smart ones stopped when they realized they picked the wrong target. The dangerous ones? They doubled down until they destroyed themselves. I want to see how far she'll go, I told Sage. Sometimes you have to let people show you exactly who they are before you show them exactly who you are. Besides, after 15 years of sentencing real criminals, I was curious what suburban justice looked like. Turns out it smelled like gasoline and tasted like revenge. 2 weeks later, I was teaching Sage how to properly sand deck boards when the crunch of expensive heels on gravel announced Cordelia's arrival. It was 9:47 a.m. on a Saturday, prime time for what she called community compliance inspections. "Mr. Sterling," she called out, clipboard already in position, "I need to document these unauthorized construction materials." I looked around at our modest pile of lumber. Pressure-treated boards I'd bought legally for a permitted deck repair. "These are for the porch renovation. I have all the permits." "Permits don't matter if materials are visible from the street." She snapped photos like a crime scene investigator. Section 7.3 clearly states that construction supplies cannot be stored where they impact neighborhood aesthetics. The irony was delicious. Here I was, a guy who'd sentenced people for actual crimes, getting lectured about lumber placement by suburban royalty. From my years on the bench, I remembered something important about HOA law. Boards must follow their own procedural rules, including proper notice for inspections. I made a mental note to check if she'd followed protocol. "When do you need these moved?" I asked reasonably. "They should never have been placed there." Her pen scratched against the clipboard with the sound of nails on a chalkboard. "That's a $200 fine plus $50 per day until remedied." Sage stopped sanding and stared. "Are you serious right now?" "Young lady, disrespect toward community leadership is also a violation." That's when Mac the contractor had to hold back Judge Sterling from explaining exactly what real authority looked like. The smell of sawdust and fresh lumber filled the air, mixing with Cordelia's overpowering perfume in a way that made the whole scene feel surreal. So I researched. Spent Sunday afternoon reading Willowbrook's bylaws cover to cover, and my suspicions were confirmed. Our dear Cordelia had skipped several legal steps. Inspections required 48-hour written notice. Board members couldn't issue violations without majority vote. She'd violated her own rules more than I had. Monday morning, I called an emergency board meeting using the exact language from Section 12.4 of their own rules. "You can't just demand meetings," Beverly Santos huffed when she answered. Beverly was the neighborhood realtor and Cordelia's best friend, a woman who somehow managed to have for sale signs on half the block while claiming to maintain neighborhood stability. Actually, Section 12.4 says any homeowner can call emergency meetings with 72-hour notice for compliance disputes. I'm emailing you the formal request now. The meeting was Thursday night in Cordelia's living room, because apparently conflict of interest wasn't in their vocabulary. The other board member, Thornton Mills, a retired Army colonel who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the whole operation, sat rigidly in the corner like a man questioning his life choices. "Mr. Sterling," Cordelia began, her voice dripping with condescension, "your attitude suggests you don't understand community living." "My attitude suggests I understand constitutional law," I replied, spreading out my documentation. "You conducted an inspection without proper notice. You issued violations without board vote. And according to your own financial records, Beverly's real estate signs violate the same advertising restrictions you're citing." Beverly's face went crimson. "Those are professional exemptions. Show me where in the bylaws." Silence. The kind of silence I used to savor in my courtroom when opposing counsel realized they had no case. The grandfather clock in Cordelia's foyer ticked loudly, marking each second of their growing discomfort. But here's where things got genuinely disturbing. Instead of backing down like a reasonable person, Cordelia doubled down with the kind of brazen stupidity that always preceded the worst courtroom disasters. "Mr. Sterling, I've been documenting your family's activities for weeks." She produced a folder thick with photographs. Sliding it across her polished coffee table like evidence in a murder trial, the photos showed Sage walking to the school bus, me checking the mailbox, us grilling burgers in our own backyard. The timestamps showed some were taken at 6 a.m. She'd been conducting surveillance from public areas. Technically legal, but absolutely psychotic behavior that reminded me of stalkers I'd prosecuted. "This is harassment," I said quietly, my judicial training keeping my voice level despite the rage building inside. "This is documentation," she snapped back. "The board votes to uphold all violations. Fine increased to $300 due to frivolous appeal process." Thornton finally spoke up, his military bearing evident. "I abstain from this vote." "Abstentions don't count," Beverly declared with the confidence of someone who'd never read Robert's Rules of Order. Actually, I said, remembering countless municipal meetings I'd observed, abstentions require formal recording and justification under parliamentary procedure. Unless you're not following proper protocols, more silence. But they voted anyway. 2-0 to uphold everything, proving they cared more about power than procedure. Walking home, I could smell the diesel exhaust from the garbage truck making its evening rounds. The acrid scent mixed with someone's barbecue smoke, creating that distinctly suburban cocktail of normal life continuing while petty tyrants played their games. "Dad," Sage said, "this is insane. Why don't you just tell them who you are?" "Because, honey, some people need to learn lessons the hard way, and I'm curious to see how deep this rabbit hole goes." That night, Dolores slipped me a note through our fence. Just a phone number and 4 words. "The Johnsons found something. Sometimes the best evidence comes from people who've already survived the war you're just starting." The phone call with Patricia Johnson changed everything. Sunday afternoon, while Sage was at a friend's house, I dialed the number Dolores had given me. Patricia answered on the second ring, and when I mentioned Willowbrook Estates, her voice went ice cold. "You're the new target," she said. Not a question, a statement of fact. "What did you find?" I asked, settling into my kitchen chair with a legal pad, old habits from taking witness statements. "Cordelia doesn't just harass people for fun. There's money involved. Big money." Patricia's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd fought a war and lost. "The HOA management company? It's owned by her husband Reginald's investment firm. They create violations, force sales, then flip the properties through shell companies." My judicial instincts kicked into overdrive. In my 15 years on the bench, I'd seen plenty of fraud schemes, but this was elegantly vicious. Create the crisis, profit from the solution. How much are we talking about? 3 forced sales in 18 months, all under market value. The Rodriguez family lost $40,000 in equity. The Williams lost $60,000. We lost everything. Our down payment, moving costs, even our kids' college fund. Monday morning, I drove to the county records office, remembering from my financial crimes cases that property records are completely public. Anyone can research ownership history, sale prices, and mortgage details online if they know where to look. The clerk helped me pull up Willowbrook transactions for the past 3 years. Pattern after pattern emerged. 3 forced sales, all 15 to 20% under market value to Maple Holdings LLC, then immediately flipped for full price. Conservative estimate, $200,000 in stolen equity per family. Tuesday brought my next violation notice, and Cordelia's first real counterattack. My garbage cans had been visible from the street for 37 minutes after pickup. The fine was $200, plus a new designation as a repeat offender. But attached was something that made my blood freeze. A second notice, about Sage. Minor child observed violating quiet hours policy through excessive noise in common areas, laughing, at 4:47 p.m. on a school day. She was targeting my daughter. The smell of fresh-cut grass and sprinkler mist suddenly felt suffocating as I realized how far this woman would go. I called Sage immediately. "Did anyone approach you after school yesterday?" "Yeah. That weird HOA lady was taking pictures while I walked to Maria's house. She said I was disturbing community peace by talking on my phone. Dad, she's creepy." That crossed every line. In my courtroom, I'd issued restraining orders for less. But Mac the contractor had to stay calm while Judge Sterling planned his response. I set up a hidden camera on my front porch, completely legal for recording your own property, and within days had footage of Cordelia measuring my grass with a ruler. She was violating her own no loitering policy while enforcing lawn regulations. But more disturbing were the timestamps. 6:23 a.m., 11:47 p.m., 2:15 a.m. This woman was obsessed. Wednesday evening, Ramon Gutierrez called. The firefighter wanted to meet at the park, his voice tight with controlled anger. "She's escalating," he said while his daughter played on swings that creaked in the humid evening air. "Started targeting my wife after she posted about the school board election. Now they're saying our kids can't use chalk on our own driveway." Mrs. Chen shuffled over with her cane, carrying a manila folder thick with violations. 82 years old, living on Social Security, and apparently a threat because she'd asked about the HOA budget. "She told me my garden gnomes were inconsistent with community aesthetics," Mrs. Chen said, her voice shaking with rage. "I've had those gnomes for 30 years. The pattern was clear. Systematic targeting of minorities, elderly, and anyone who questioned authority. In my civil rights cases, I'd seen identical discrimination patterns. I called Sarah Hassan that evening, my old colleague from my prosecutor days, now specialized in civil rights law. Mac, this could be federal, Fair Housing Act violations, conspiracy, possibly RICO if the financial scheme is big enough. Her voice carried the excitement of a prosecutor smelling blood. But we need more evidence. What kind of evidence? Financial records, communication intercepts, and... She paused. You should run for the HOA board. Get inside access to their records. Thursday morning brought Cordelia's most brazen move yet, a certified letter demanding property inspection for code compliance within 48 hours. She wanted inside my house. Absolutely not, I told Sage, who was reading over my shoulder. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I barely noticed. She's fishing for more violations. Dad, just tell her you're a judge. This is insane. But I was remembering something from my prosecutor days. The best way to catch criminals was to let them think they were winning right up until the moment you destroyed them. No, sweetheart, I want to see how desperate she gets. That afternoon, I announced my candidacy for the HOA board, posted it on the community Facebook page, and emailed every resident I could find. My platform was simple: transparency, fair enforcement, financial accountability. Cordelia's response arrived within hours. We'll see about that. Sometimes the best way to smoke out a criminal is to threaten their power directly. My campaign announcement hit the neighborhood like a bomb in a library. Within 6 hours, I had 17 supportive emails and one very angry phone call from Beverly Santos. Mac, you need to withdraw your candidacy immediately, she said, her realtor voice losing its professional polish. You don't understand the complexities of community management. Enlighten me. Well, for starters, candidates must have a clean compliance record. You currently have outstanding violations totaling $600. I almost laughed. From my years prosecuting fraud cases, I recognize this tactic. Create legal problems for your opponent, then disqualify them based on the problems you created. Those violations were issued improperly without board vote or proper notice. That's your opinion. That's HOA law, Beverly. Check section 12.7 of your own bylaws. The line went dead. Friday morning brought the counterattack. Anonymous flyers appeared in every mailbox overnight, printed on expensive paper that smelled like fresh laser toner and desperation. "Stop the deadbeat dad," screamed the headline, followed by accusations about my divorce, bankruptcy fraud, and fitness as a parent. Sage found me reading one at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold while rage built behind my ribs like pressure in a boiler. "Dad, this is about me too," she said, pointing to a paragraph questioning whether a troubled teen from a broken home belonged in Willowbrook. "Half my class is going to see this." The sound of paper rustling filled our kitchen as I folded the flyer carefully. Outside, I could hear neighbors whispering at bus stops, their voices carrying the nervous energy of people watching a car crash in slow motion. But Cordelia had made a critical error. The flyers contained information that could only have come from illegally accessing my credit report, information that professionals charge serious money to obtain through fraudulent credentials. Sarah Hassan called that afternoon with confirmation. Someone ran a full background check using fake law enforcement credentials. That's identity theft and federal wire fraud. Her voice carried the satisfaction of a prosecutor who'd found the smoking gun. "I've got FBI contacts who will be very interested. Here's what most people don't know about opposition research. Accessing someone's credit report or court records without legitimate purpose is a federal crime, even if the information is technically public. Always document when someone knows details they shouldn't have access to." While Sarah worked her contacts, I focused on building my coalition. Ramon helped me canvass families who'd been harassed. Mrs. Chen opened her house for coffee meetings where people could speak freely, the smell of her homemade cookies mixing with nervous whispers about HOA retaliation. The support was overwhelming. Maria Santos, no relation to Beverly, showed me 23 violations for her kids' bicycles being improperly stored in their own garage. The Park family had been fined for Christmas lights identical to those on Beverly's house. "She's destroying this community," said David Park, bouncing his toddler while his wife nodded grimly. "My kids are afraid to play outside." Tuesday brought the debate at the elementary school cafeteria. The room smelled like industrial disinfectant and childhood memories, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, while 52 residents packed into tiny plastic chairs designed for 8-year-olds. Cordelia arrived like she was attending a board meeting at Goldman Sachs. Navy suit that cost more than most people's car payments, flanked by Beverly and 2 country club wives who looked like hostages. I wore my contractor uniform intentionally: jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt that had seen actual labor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia began, her voice dripping with practiced authority, "we're here because some people don't appreciate what it takes to maintain community standards." She spent 15 minutes listing achievements. Property values up 12%, undesirable elements relocated to more appropriate neighborhoods, and common areas properly maintained. That last phrase about undesirable elements made half the room shift uncomfortably in their squeaky chairs. When my turn came, I stood slowly, feeling the weight of 52 pairs of eyes and 15 years of courtroom experience. "I moved here for the same reason you did: safe streets, good schools, and a place where families could build something lasting." I gestured around the room. "But look around you. Do we look like a community, or do we look like people afraid of their own neighbors?" I pulled out my documentation. In 18 months, 3 families were forced to sell due to escalating violations. All 3 sales went to the same company. All 3 families were minorities or single parents. I let that sink in. "Mrs. Whitmore, would you like to explain why your husband's investment firm owns the company that bought all 3 properties?" The room went dead silent except for fluorescent buzzing and someone's nervous cough. Cordelia's face cycled through white, red, then something approaching purple. "That's character assassination from a man who can't maintain his own marriage." I smiled the same way I used to smile at defendants who just talked themselves into longer sentences. "Mrs. Whitmore, my divorce is public record. Your financial records aren't yet, but they will be." The murmur that went through the crowd sounded like justice clearing its throat. The phone call that changed everything came at 6:47 a.m. on a Wednesday. Sarah Hassan's voice was tight with excitement and disgust. "Mac, you need to sit down for this." I was already sitting, coffee mug halfway to my lips, watching Sage get ready for school through our kitchen window. The morning air carried the smell of bacon from someone's breakfast and the faint scent of gasoline from where the landscaping crew was refueling their equipment across the street. My paralegal was doing routine insurance research for the civil case when she found something that made her physically sick. Sarah paused, and I could hear papers rustling like autumn leaves. Cordelia increased her homeowner's insurance by 400% 6 months ago, specifically added a rider for malicious destruction by neighbors. The coffee mug stopped halfway to my mouth. In my years handling arson cases, I'd learned that suspicious insurance changes before incidents were prosecutor gold. The ceramic felt suddenly heavy in my hands. Who the hell gets insurance for neighbor attacks unless they're planning to create the attack? Gets worse. I cross-referenced the dates with your harassment timeline. She bought the policy 3 days after you moved in. 3 days, Mac. My judicial mind started connecting dots faster than I wanted to. The timeline meant this wasn't random harassment. It was premeditated conspiracy. "Sarah, pull the insurance records for the other families, the ones who were forced out." "Already did. Johnson family had a mysterious shed fire 6 months before they sold. Gasoline accelerant, no source identified. Williams family had a gas leak during a routine HOA inspection that nearly killed their 8-year-old daughter. Rodriguez family had a break-in during a vacation that half the neighborhood knew they'd canceled due to job loss." The pattern was sickening. Create the crisis, document the damage, collect the insurance, then swoop in to buy the property cheap when traumatized families fled. The smell of coffee in my kitchen suddenly made me nauseous. "There's more," Sarah continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Reginald's investment firm doesn't just own the management company. They own a piece of the insurance company too. They're literally paying themselves." I set my coffee down before I dropped it. The whole scheme was elegant in its evil simplicity. Harass families, create incidents, pay themselves insurance money, then buy the damaged properties for pennies and flip them for full price. Estimated take? Conservative? $2.3 million over 5 years? And Mac, there's a federal angle. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. And if we can prove the civil rights targeting. Her voice carried the hunger of a prosecutor who'd found a career-making case. That afternoon, Detective Maria Santos arrived at my house in an unmarked car, her footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway. 20-year veteran who specialized in insurance fraud and, thankfully, no relation to Beverly. "Mr. Sterling," she said, settling into my living room chair with the practiced ease of someone who'd delivered bad news before. "Miss Hassan briefed me on your situation. What we're looking at here could be RICO territory, organized criminal enterprise." The irony made my head spin. Here I was, a sitting judge being briefed on criminal conspiracy in my own living room by a detective investigating my neighbor. What's my role? Keep doing exactly what you're doing. Let her escalate. People like Cordelia can't help themselves. They always go too far. Detective Santos leaned forward, her voice dropping. But we need to discuss your family's safety. If she's willing to commit arson for insurance money and she's already targeting your daughter. That evening, I had the hardest conversation of my life with Sage. She was doing homework at the kitchen table when I sat down across from her, the overhead light casting harsh shadows that made everything feel like an interrogation room. Sweetheart, we need to talk about Cordelia, and it's going to sound crazy. She looked up from her calculus textbook, pencil still in hand. Crazier than her measuring our grass with a ruler at midnight? I told her everything. The insurance fraud, the pattern of escalation, the fact that we were likely next on the list for an incident. I watched my 16-year-old daughter's face cycle through disbelief, anger, and something that looked disturbingly like fear. So basically, she's a criminal and we're the bait? We're not bait, sweetheart. We're the trap. Dad, that's literally the same thing. Her voice cracked slightly, the teenager facade slipping to reveal the scared kid underneath. The next morning brought a certified letter that confirmed Detective Santos's prediction. Heavy paper that smelled like legal intimidation and barely contained rage. Cordelia was demanding immediate access to inspect my house for safety violations, potential fire hazards, and insurance compliance issues. She wanted inside my home, where my daughter slept, where we kept our most personal belongings, where she could plant evidence or create the incident she needed. Reading that letter, I realized this wasn't about HOA violations anymore. This was about a sociopath who'd found the perfect legal system to destroy families systematically. But she'd made one critical miscalculation. She'd picked a fight with the one person in this district with both the legal knowledge to destroy her and the judicial authority to make it stick. My garage became a war room. By Friday evening, it looked like something between a detective's evidence board and a contractor's workshop, complete with the smell of coffee brewing on a hot plate and the nervous energy of people planning something that could either save their community or land them all in legal trouble. Sarah Hassan spread legal documents across my workbench while Detective Santos connected surveillance photos to a timeline on the pegboard where I usually hung my tools. Ramon brought encrypted burner phones for our core team, and Mrs. Chen arrived with a thermos of soup and a manila folder containing 30 years of neighborhood observations. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, looking around at our unlikely alliance, we're about to take down a criminal enterprise that's been operating under the guise of community management. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. While Detective Santos worked the federal investigation angle, we'd create multiple pressure points simultaneously. Sarah would force an emergency HOA audit through the county assessor's office. Ramon would coordinate the neighborhood surveillance network. Mrs. Chen would handle community organizing among the elderly residents who'd been too scared to speak up, and I would be the bait. Here's what most people don't understand about insurance fraud, Detective Santos explained, pointing to a flowchart she'd drawn on my whiteboard. The perpetrators always escalate their methods because they become addicted to both the money and the power. Cordelia's moved from simple harassment to creating actual incidents. The next step is always more dramatic. From my years on the bench handling arson cases, I knew she was right. Fire was the preferred method because it destroyed evidence while creating maximum trauma and insurance payouts. So we give her what she wants, I said, a target too tempting to resist. The technical preparation took 3 days. Ramon helped me install a legitimate fire suppression system throughout the house, high-end equipment that would actually protect us while also demonstrating our genuine concern about fire safety. We documented everything for insurance purposes, creating a paper trail that would prove our good faith. Meanwhile, Sarah worked her magic with the forensic accountant Jennifer Walsh, who agreed to examine the HOA books pro bono. What Jennifer found made even the detective whistle. Shell companies within shell companies, Jennifer explained over the phone, her voice carrying the satisfaction of someone who'd untangled a particularly complex fraud. Money flows from the HOA to management fees, then to maintenance contracts at triple market rate, then back to companies owned by Reginald's investment firm. It's like financial incest. The neighborhood surveillance network came together faster than I'd expected. The Park family installed new security cameras that just happened to cover the street approaches to my house. Maria Santos positioned motion-activated lights that would illuminate anyone approaching from the backyards. Even old Mr. Peterson, who'd barely spoken to anyone in 5 years, volunteered to monitor the cameras from his insomnia-fueled late-night vigils. It's like watching a really boring spy movie, Sage observed, looking out our kitchen window at the discreet preparations happening throughout the neighborhood. Except the spies are soccer moms and retired teachers. Wednesday night brought our first breakthrough. Thornton Mills approached me while I was checking my mailbox, glancing around nervously like a man about to defect. "Mac, I need to talk to you, away from the house." His military bearing was intact, but his eyes carried the guilt of someone who'd stayed silent too long. We walked to the park, our footsteps echoing on the empty sidewalk while streetlights created pools of yellow in the darkness. "I've been recording the board meetings for 3 years," he said quietly. "Started because I suspected financial irregularities, but then..." He handed me a thumb drive. "She talks about you people like you're insects to be exterminated." The recordings were damning. Cordelia's voice discussing which families didn't belong and needed to be relocated to more appropriate neighborhoods. Beverly suggesting they make examples of anyone who questioned board authority. Most chilling was a conversation about my family specifically. "The contractor has a teenage daughter," Cordelia's voice came through my laptop speakers with the clinical detachment of a predator. "Teenagers are careless with things like candles and hair straighteners. Tragic accidents happen." My hands clenched into fists. She was planning to target Sage directly. Thursday morning, I made my announcement on the community Facebook page. I'd received a large insurance settlement from my divorce and would be starting major home renovations next month. New roof, electrical work, complete kitchen remodel. I even posted photos of building materials being delivered. The bait was in the water. Cordelia's response came within hours. A violation notice for unauthorized material storage and a demand to inspect my property for fire safety compliance before any renovation work began. "She wants inside the house," Detective Santos observed when I showed her the letter. "This is it. She's going to plant accelerant or create some kind of accident during the inspection." The trap was set. All we needed now was for Cordelia to walk into it. The smell of sawdust and anticipation filled my garage as we made our final preparations. Tomorrow would either vindicate our months of investigation or prove that sometimes suburban evil was cleverer than federal justice. The election momentum was building like a pressure cooker about to explode. My informal polling showed me leading 65 to 35%, and you could practically smell Cordelia's desperation mixing with the autumn air and dying leaves. Her response was swift and vicious. Monday morning brought an emergency board meeting notice, called specifically to change the election rules. New requirement: all candidates must have clean compliance records with no outstanding violations or liens. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday, 3 days before the scheduled vote. "They can't just change the rules mid-election," Sage said, reading the notice over breakfast. The smell of her cinnamon toast mixed with the acrid scent of my burning coffee as I processed this latest escalation. "Actually, they can try," I replied, remembering similar procedural manipulations from my courtroom days. "But Sarah's already filing an injunction. Standard election law prohibits rule changes after candidate registration closes." The financial pressure campaign started immediately. By Tuesday, I had certified letters demanding payment of $1,200 in accumulated violations, with a 30-day ultimatum before foreclosure proceedings would begin. But I wasn't the only target. Ramon received an identical demand, as did Mrs. Chen and 4 other families who'd publicly supported my candidacy. "It's coordinated intimidation," Detective Santos confirmed during our Wednesday morning call. "Classic pattern. Silence opposition through financial terrorism." That afternoon brought Beverly's most brazen move yet. She appeared at my front door during Sage's homework time, her realtor smile looking like plastic stretched too tight. "Mac, I think we can resolve this whole misunderstanding," she said, settling uninvited into my living room chair. Her perfume was aggressive, the kind that announced its presence from 3 rooms away. "The board is prepared to offer a settlement. $5,000, all violations dismissed, and a clean slate." "What's the catch?" "You withdraw from the election and sign a non-disclosure agreement about any concerns you might have about board operations." I pretended to consider it while my hidden camera recorded every word. "That's generous, Beverly, but I'm curious, why so eager to settle now?" Her smile faltered slightly. "We believe in community harmony." "Or you believe in avoiding federal investigation into insurance fraud." The plastic smile shattered completely. "I don't know what you're implying, but..." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." I leaned forward. "Your offer sounds like vote buying, which is a felony. Should I call Detective Santos now, or would you prefer to leave and pretend this conversation never happened?" She left so fast, she forgot her purse. That evening, The surveillance escalation reached disturbing new levels. Sage called me at work, actually a courthouse meeting, to report that Cordelia had driven by our house 8 times since lunch, sometimes parking across the street to take photos. Dad, she's using different cars now. Mrs. Peterson's silver Honda, then some blue truck I've never seen. Sage's voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. She's also wearing different clothes each time, like she's trying to disguise herself. The stalking behavior was crossing from harassment into criminal territory. When I got home, I found fresh tire tracks in our flower bed and cigarette butts near our mailbox. Cordelia didn't smoke, which meant she had accomplices. Thursday brought the direct confrontation we'd all been dreading. I was grilling burgers for dinner when Cordelia appeared in our backyard without warning, clipboard in hand and that psychotic smile firmly in place. "Mr. Sterling, I'm investigating a noise complaint." "From who? And how did you get into my backyard?" "Community standards violations don't require warrants." She was photographing our patio furniture like it was evidence of war crimes. Unauthorized evening gatherings, excessive cooking odors affecting neighbors, and she pointed at Sage's bike leaning against the garage. Improper storage of recreational vehicles. That's when my 16-year-old daughter did something that made me simultaneously proud and terrified. She pulled out her phone and called 911. "Yes, I'd like to report a trespasser. Adult woman, approximately 55, in our backyard without permission, taking photographs of our family." Cordelia's eyes widened in shock. "You can't call the police on me. I'm the HOA president." "Ma'am," Sage said with devastating teenage precision, "that's not actually a real job." Officer Jake Morrison arrived within 6 minutes, a 20-year veteran who'd clearly dealt with HOA disputes before. He listened to both sides, examined the property boundaries, and checked the HOA bylaws on his phone. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're trespassing. HOA authority doesn't extend to entering private property without permission or legal justification. This is harassment of a community leader." "No, ma'am, this is you learning what actual authority looks like." Officer Morrison turned to me. "Mr. Sterling, would you like to press charges?" I looked at Cordelia's face, rage, fear, and something approaching panic, all competing for dominance. "Not this time, officer, but I'd appreciate it documented in case there are future incidents." As Morrison escorted Cordelia off our property, she turned back with eyes that promised this wasn't over. "Careful, Mac. Sometimes accidents happen to people who don't know when to quit." That threat, recorded on 3 different security cameras and witnessed by a police officer, was exactly what Detective Santos had been waiting for. The final piece fell into place when Detective Santos called Thursday morning with news that made my blood run cold and my prosecutor instincts sing simultaneously. "We intercepted Cordelia's text messages to Reginald last night," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. Quote, "Problem needs permanent solution before renewal deadline. Can't wait for election." End quote. I was standing in my kitchen watching Sage pack her overnight bag for a school camping trip when the full implications hit me. They're planning something for this weekend. Insurance policy renews Monday. Election is Tuesday. If they're going to create an incident, it has to be now. Detective Santos paused. "Mac, we're moving to active surveillance starting tonight. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Looking at my daughter stuffing her sleeping bag into her backpack, humming off key while she worked, I felt the weight of every decision that had led us here. She threatened my family. We end this now. Friday evening, Sage left for her overnight school trip with theatrical complaints about missing the most boring weekend ever. She had no idea she was being evacuated for her own safety, and I intended to keep it that way. At 8 p.m., I made a show of loading my truck with construction equipment and telling several neighbors I was heading to a weekend job site 2 hours away. Mrs. Peterson watched from her window while Mr. Park waved from his driveway, both part of our surveillance network. In reality, I drove exactly 3 blocks before circling back to Ramon's house, where Detective Santos had set up a command post in his living room. The smell of microwave popcorn and nervous energy filled the space as we watched multiple camera feeds of my supposedly empty house. Motion sensors are active, infrared cameras recording, and we have officers positioned at both ends of the street, Detective Santos explained, adjusting her earpiece. If she so much as looks at your property wrong, we'll have her. The waiting was excruciating. Hours passed with nothing but the occasional cat triggering motion sensors and the distant sound of Friday night parties where normal people lived normal lives without federal surveillance operations in their neighborhoods. Then, at 11:47 p.m., everything changed. "Contact," whispered Officer Martinez through the radio. "Subject approaching from Maple Street on foot, dark clothing, carrying a bag. On the infrared feed, we watched Cordelia move through shadows like a suburban ninja, staying away from streetlights and using neighbors' hedges for cover. She'd parked Reginald's sedan 3 blocks away and walked, clearly believing she was unobserved. Jesus, Ramon breathed, watching the screens. She really is doing this. The equipment in her bag made my stomach clench. Gas can, matches, glass cutter, and what looked like a small crowbar. This wasn't some desperate amateur. She'd planned this like a professional. "All units hold position," Detective Santos commanded. "Let her commit the crime before we move." Watching Cordelia cut through the screen on Sage's bedroom window felt like witnessing a violation that went beyond property damage. This was the room where my daughter did homework, talked to friends, dreamed about college. This psychopath was treating it like her personal playground. She moved through the house with disturbing confidence, clearly having studied the layout during her previous inspections. The night vision cameras tracked her progress as she poured gasoline throughout the living room, kitchen, and hallway, blocking escape routes like someone who'd done this before. "That's not random," I whispered, recognizing the pattern from arson cases I'd prosecuted. "She's trying to ensure anyone inside wouldn't survive." The planted evidence was almost elegant in its simplicity. A faulty space heater plugged in and positioned near accelerant-soaked curtains. The resulting fire would look like an electrical accident until investigators found the gasoline residue. "She's lighting the match," Officer Martinez reported, his voice crackling through static. "All units move now," Detective Santos commanded. The next 60 seconds unfolded like a choreographed dance of justice. Officers emerged from shadows as Cordelia struck the match, her face illuminated by the small flame like a demon in a medieval painting. The smell of gasoline and sulfur filled the night air as she touched flame to gasoline-soaked fabric. "Police, drop the match and put your hands up." The look on Cordelia's face when she realized she'd been caught was worth every moment of the past 6 months. Shock, rage, and dawning comprehension that her reign of suburban terror was over. "You can't arrest me," she screamed as Officer Martinez cuffed her hands behind her back. "I'm the HOA president. This is my neighborhood." "Ma'am, you're under arrest for attempted arson, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud," Detective Santos replied, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting months to say those words. The news crews David Kim had positioned were already rolling, broadcasting live footage of the HOA Karen being perp-walked in handcuffs, while my house, thankfully undamaged thanks to the fire suppression system, stood as evidence of her criminal intent. By midnight, #HOA Karen was trending nationally, and Cordelia Whitmore had become the poster child for suburban corruption gone wrong. 6 months later, the federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity. I adjusted my judicial robes, the same ones that still carried the faint memory of that night's gasoline smell, and looked down at the woman who'd tried to destroy my family. Cordelia Whitmore sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit that clashed horribly with her attempt to maintain dignity. Gone were the pearls, the designer clothes, the clipboard of authority. What remained was a middle-aged woman who'd built an empire of cruelty and watched it crumble in federal court. The gallery buzzed with energy I'd rarely seen in my 15 years on the bench. National media filled the front rows, their cameras trained on what had become known as the HOA Karen case. Behind them sat 24 families whose lives Cordelia had systematically destroyed, finally getting their day in court. "Your Honor," announced the bailiff, "the matter of United States v. Cordelia Whitmore, case number 2024, CR 1847. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who'd tried to burn down my house was now facing sentencing from the judge she'd never known she was harassing. Local news had dubbed it the ultimate reverse Uno card, and honestly, that wasn't far off. Federal prosecutor Janet Williams approached the podium with a stack of documents thick enough to choke a horse. "Your Honor, the government seeks maximum sentencing based on the scope and systematic nature of these crimes." The victim impact statements began, and I watched Cordelia's face as her true damage was laid bare. Patricia Johnson had flown in from Phoenix, her voice shaking as she described the PTSD from harassment that drove her family from their dream home. "We saved for 8 years to buy that house," Patricia testified, tears streaming down her face. "Our kids had never lived anywhere else. She destroyed more than property. She destroyed our sense of safety, our trust in community, our children's faith that adults would protect them." The Rodriguez family followed, describing the gas leak incident that nearly killed their 8-year-old daughter. Maria Rodriguez's voice broke as she explained how her daughter still checked the stove multiple times each night, terrified of invisible gas that might poison her family. Mrs. Chen's testimony was perhaps the most devastating. At 84, she spoke with the clarity of someone who'd lived through real oppression and recognized its suburban cousin. "I survived the Cultural Revolution in China," she said, her voice steady but fierce. "I came to America because I believed in justice, in communities that protected the weak instead of preying on them." Mrs. Whitmore made me feel like I was back in a world where neighbors reported neighbors and authority meant terror. When Sage took the stand, every parent in that courtroom held their breath. My 16-year-old daughter approached the microphone with the poise of someone who'd grown up faster than she should have. "Mrs. Whitmore didn't just target my dad," Sage said, her young voice carrying through the packed courtroom. "She made me afraid to walk to school, afraid to have friends over, afraid to exist in my own neighborhood. She taught me that some adults use power to hurt children when they can't hurt the adults they really hate." The financial evidence came next, displayed on screens throughout the courtroom. $2.8 million in fraudulent schemes, 23 families harassed, 8 families driven from their homes, a systematic campaign of discrimination that violated federal civil rights law. "The defendants' crimes weren't crimes of passion," Prosecutor Williams continued. "They were calculated, systematic, and designed to maximize both financial gain and psychological trauma. She didn't just steal money, she stole families' sense of home, safety, and belonging." Cordelia's defense attorney, an expensive suit named Harrison Pike, stood to present mitigation evidence. Character witnesses described her charity work, her church attendance, her role as a pillar of the community. "My client made mistakes," Pike argued, "but she believed she was protecting property values and community standards. Her actions, while misguided, came from a place of caring about her neighborhood." I'd heard similar arguments hundreds of times from defense attorneys trying to humanize their clients. Sometimes they worked, not today. When it came time for Cordelia to speak, she stood slowly, her orange jumpsuit rustling in the silent courtroom. For a moment, I thought she might actually show remorse, might acknowledge the pain she'd caused. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the same entitled authority that had started this whole nightmare. "I was protecting my community from people who didn't understand our standards. Property values, neighborhood character, the things that make America great. Someone has to defend them." The courtroom erupted in angry murmurs. She was doubling down, even here, even now. "These people," she continued, gesturing toward the victims in the gallery, "they brought chaos and disorder to a peaceful community. Everything I did was legal under HOA authority." Judge Patricia Williams, who'd taken over for my recusal, looked at Cordelia with the expression reserved for defendants who'd just talked themselves into maximum sentences. "Mrs. Whitmore, you have shown no remorse, no understanding of your crimes, and no respect for the families you've devastated. This court sentences you to 8 years in federal prison." The gavel fell like thunder. 1 year later, I stood in what used to be Cordelia's backyard, watching neighborhood kids play on the new playground equipment we'd installed where her pretentious garden sculptures once stood. The smell of barbecue smoke and children's laughter mixed with the scent of fresh mulch from the community garden, creating the soundtrack of a neighborhood finally free to breathe. The transformation had been remarkable. After Cordelia's house was foreclosed and sold to pay restitution, the community voted unanimously to purchase it and convert the property into a neighborhood center. The Sage Sterling Community Garden now occupied her former living room, with raised beds tended by families who'd once lived in fear of HOA violations. "Dad, Mrs. Chen's tomatoes are officially bigger than yours," Sage called out, dirt under her fingernails and genuine joy in her voice as she helped the elderly woman stake her prize plants. At 17 now, my daughter had grown into someone who understood that real community meant lifting each other up, not tearing each other down. The new HOA board bore no resemblance to Cordelia's regime. Ramon served as treasurer, his firefighters' attention to detail ensuring every penny was accounted for and publicly reported monthly. Mrs. Chen had become secretary, her decades of teaching giving her perfect skills for keeping meeting minutes that actually reflected what happened. Thornton Mills, finally free to speak his conscience, served as our security coordinator, protecting residents from threats, not creating them. And me? Well, Judge Maxwell Sterling had returned to his day job, but Mac, the neighborhood handyman, still spent weekends teaching carpentry skills to anyone interested. The sound of power tools and laughter now filled Saturday mornings where Cordelia's inspection visits once brought dread. The financial recovery had exceeded everyone's expectations. Restitution from the criminal case, plus civil judgments totaling $4.7 million, had created comprehensive victim support. Property values had actually increased 18% once the harassment stopped, and word spread about our community's transformation from HOA hell to neighborhood heaven. The ripple effects went far beyond Willowbrook. The HOA Karen case had sparked national legislation requiring HOA transparency and oversight. 12 states had adopted the Willowbrook Standard, mandating independent audits, elected oversight boards, and civil rights training for HOA leadership. The Emmy-winning documentary Burned: The HOA Conspiracy had inspired investigations in 47 communities nationwide. More importantly, families were healing. The Rodriguez daughter no longer checked the stove obsessively, instead teaching other kids how to plant herbs in the community garden. Patricia Johnson had visited twice, amazed by the peaceful community she'd been forced to leave. The Park family had become unofficial neighborhood historians, documenting our transition from fear to fellowship. Beverly Santos now worked at a grocery store checkout, her fall from suburban royalty serving as a cautionary tale. Dr. Pemberton taught court-mandated anger management classes, an irony that never got old. Reginald remained in federal prison, his financial empire dismantled and distributed to victims. The practical lessons had spread nationwide. The Sage Sterling Scholarship Fund now supported 23 children from harassed families pursuing college degrees. Our HOA Transparency Project provided free legal clinics for residents facing association harassment. The annual Willowbrook Justice Festival celebrated community cooperation over conformity enforcement, drawing visitors from across the country. "You know what the best part is?" Sage asked, finding me lost in thought by the garden gate where Cordelia's surveillance cameras once lurked. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the distant sound of neighbors actually talking to each other. She tried to destroy our family, but instead she helped us build something better for everyone. She was right. Cordelia's attempt to drive us out had instead created the most genuinely connected neighborhood I'd ever seen. Children played freely. Neighbors collaborated on projects, and monthly community meetings actually solved problems instead of creating them. As sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's making sure it never happens to anyone else, and building something beautiful from the ashes of someone else's hatred. Looking around at families gathered around barbecue grills, sharing stories and building friendships where fear once ruled, I knew we'd won something bigger than a legal case. We'd reclaimed the idea that communities should nurture families, not destroy them. "All right, everyone listening," I said, addressing the camera in my mind, "I want to hear your HOA nightmare stories. Drop them in the comments below, because you're not alone in this fight, and together we can build something better." And if you want more stories about ordinary people fighting back against suburban tyranny and winning, hit that subscribe button for HOA Tales, where we prove that justice isn't just served cold, it's served with a side of community healing.